Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 15 of Project Odyssey, the epic adventure where we're trying to get our stranded Kerbals back to their own universe. However, to do that, we need engines, and we need, because it's a game and we want to have fun with it, good-looking engines, good-looking flames, good-looking smoke. And I don't think that all of them are in really great shape right now. I have temporarily turned on the infinite fuel cheat so that I can look at the flames coming out of these engines, and look at that one right there. Horrible! It doesn't look right at all. Some of them are okay. Those boosters aren't too bad, but I have noticed that when the boosters are taking off sometimes, and I'm starting to pick up speed, that the flame behind them looks a little bit less like flame and a little bit more like separate balls of fire that start spreading out too far. And that one right there, you can see it looks like the flame is just a little bit too low below the engine, and it should be moved up a little bit. So these are the sorts of things I'm checking for right now by turning on all these engines one by one. I'm looking for gaps between the particles. I'm looking for bad smoke. I'm looking for gaps between the flames and the engine itself that make it look kind of dumb. And I need to go back in and fix all of those little problems in order to get this looking the way that I really want it to be. What I'm really trying to do right now is launch the first thing, what are we going to call it? It's like a space station, but it's also kind of like a ship. You're going to see it here in just a minute because it's going to head toward Minmus. And what I'm trying to do is get the engines on all the different stages there, including this new one, which you can see coming up here in a moment. See that one I'm clicking on right now? It's gigantic, and it's making the whole thing shake, so I have to shut it back down here in a second. But two engines to the right, you can see one that looks like a Delta upper stage engine, and that's the one that is part of my new station that is heading over to Minmus. And honestly, the flame when I was doing my testing is pathetic. Like, check out this one I'm about to click on right now. See, this is a different upper stage rocket, and you've seen that one before on my Centaurs and stuff, and that one looks pretty good. Now I'm clicking on the new one for the station. That's at full power. Oh, pathetic. We need to get in there and make a configuration for hot rockets that'll actually put some meat into that flame. So that's what's up next. And a couple days later, we're ready to go. I've got that engine all fixed up now. The exhaust looks a lot better than it did before. I've put some hot rocket support on it and some smoke screen, and we are underway. Look at this rocket. This thing is gorgeous. I've added new parts for this little baby right here, and what we have hiding up inside that fairing right there is the Minmus Traveller. It is my sort of space station, sort of spaceship. I don't know exactly what it is. It kind of is a little combo of both. The basic idea, though, is that it is only going to be our well, it's not really a planet. You don't call it interplanetary, but we're going to travel to Minmus in that. However, we are going to have a couple extra things attached on the sides of it. We're going to have to launch crew up that will get inside there. Specifically, of course, Hadfield and Joseph is going to go in order to help out too. Jebediah is flying this craft for now, simply because Remote Tech was giving me fits again. That version is still broken sometimes. So I have trouble with unmanned craft sometimes based on the order in which the parts are attached, and sometimes it's hard to tell what the right order is. So rather than deal with it, I'm just going to have Jebediah launch with this thing here. He's a great pilot. He can handle it. You can see we have deployed that payload, and that's what the ship looks like inside there. That decoupler is actually, that fairing base is actually going to stay part of the ship. I don't think it looks too bad. And on top of that, if anything were to go wrong with the rocket engine, we could actually decouple it and save the crew. So let's say it's overheating or it goes critical or something like that, just like in a Star Trek episode where they can eject the warp core, we can actually eject our whole engine assembly if we really need to. So now before a Hydra can bring up Joseph and Hadfield, and before we send up our little lander that's going to be on one of the docking nodes on that thing, we need to go and take a look at this in the vehicle assembly building so that you can see all the cool little knickknacks and bits and pieces that went into making it. Alright, so the Minmus Traveller has a couple solid rocket boosters to help give it its extra start there, and a regular 3.75 meter lower stage. I've added this new tapered decoupler in order to hold on to that base right there, which I think looks like a delta lower stage. Look at that bit right there. That is composed of a couple pieces. Of course, there's more lights on the outside of it. It's composed of a couple pieces, 3 pieces. We have our engine right here, our fuel tank right there, and a coupler base. And the way they've set this up is when you hook this up here, and I've actually changed this a little bit to make it easier to assemble. When you hook this up, the fairing base actually goes around it like that, and it has those struts in there to give it that look of being like a delta lower stage. But there you go, there's those 3 pieces there. I've added this new cool fuel tank with the black borders and the yellow line there and the little red stripes. I think that looks really nice. Now we'll scroll up here and take a look inside the fairing. Before I do that, actually, I've added a little thing that you're not going to see once I've opened it up. Right there, I've added a little structural integrity strut kind of thing that goes right from here over to there, attaches the payload to the fairing to help give it extra stability so it doesn't shake all over the place. But I don't want it to look ugly in there. So what I've done is I've gone to the stock parts and taken a decoupler, but shrunk it down really small. So once that decouples, all that's going to be left are these 3 little pins right there, and it won't look too ugly. Now if we pull back here and take a look inside the fairing, that's what you get to see once it has decoupled. Now, when I mentioned that you can actually pop this off right here, if you were to do that while it's flying, then what would happen is you would be left with that, and the engine assembly would float away, and everybody would be safe and sound, secure and protected, just in case. Then if you want to take a look down at the bottom here, we can see we have these extended RCS boons. And those are really cool. They go way out so that they give extra torque. And if you saw up there when I was giving it a little spin with the way that it's way out here like this, when that little blast comes out, it spins really fast. Now it's a little slower when it's going up or down, trying to rotate like pitch and yaw, but the roll is quite fast. So that's pretty cool. Now if we scroll in a little bit deeper here, we can see that there was a fuel line that was using a trick I showed in a previous episode, but I'm going to show it one more time just to make sure that anyone who didn't get a chance to see it gets to see it now. Normally, a decoupler like this is not cross-feed compatible, and you want that because you don't want your payload normally to be able to suck down or have its fuel sucked down from up there down into an engine usually, but in some cases you might want to do something like that. Well, in this case I had an extra fuel tank right there, but I had it on the bottom of the decoupler. Now I still want my delta to be able to drain the fuel across that. So what I do is I take that, move it down there, take that, move it over there. Then we put something in between, like that, let's say. You do that, and then you take the fuel line and you put it there and you run it down into there. Now when you take this off and take this away and you put this back again, it will automatically connect the fuel from here into the fuel here right through that pipe. Makes it a lot easier to make sure that you're getting it across something that is not cross-feed compatible. Okay, so moving on, if we take away that one, you can see that that's actually taking 4 solar panels with it. I have an extra set up here, so there's 8 total solar panels on the whole thing. On the back and the front here, we have some radiator and RCS combo parts. Those are brand new. Of Got those put on there. We've also got this boom here that comes out for communications on a hinge. That was my remote tech. We have a wastewater tank, something for Kerbal attachment system. We have our communications. That's not the communications. That's the communications right there. We got Kerbal attachment system boxes on both sides and a lot of water because we're splitting the water with this right here. That's our water splitter. So we're splitting the water with that, which will produce oxygen, which can go into this tank. We also have a CO2 waste tank. We don't really do anything with the wastewater or the CO2 waste tank. Those are just for temporary storage so that we can dump it out whenever we know that we're safe to do so. So if we take off that, you can see that I had those on there just to have extra room in order to attach those external tanks. Now around here we have a couple more communications dishes, that water splitter, and the big battery. Now this was my avionics ring that theoretically was supposed to give it unmanned control so that I could launch this up with nobody in it, and then Jeb and Hadfield and Joseph were going to go up all by themselves in a Hydra 2. But when I realized that I was having my remote tech problem, I left that on there, but I stuck Jeb in, and so he flew it instead. Okay, moving our way up, I've added this new part, and that is basically what I'm pretending is that there's a little space right in here to access external compartments. So the amount of material that's in this outer rim is theoretically about 600 units of fuel, not fuel, 600 units of food, a different letter, a different word that starts with an F. Okay, so they can come down into this middle section here to access these imaginary compartments, get their food, and then that should provide them with plenty to last all the way to Minmus and back, and then some if they needed it. We have a Kerbal attachment system winch, just in case. Who knows when you might need something like that. We've got a couple docking stations right there. This is technically an aircraft fuselage part. Fuselage, I mean to say. But I'm using it for a space station part because I could imagine that space station module too. I already mentioned those. And of course we have more lights. And that brings us to the top where we have the one and only part from LLL Labs, the new spaceship, space station, bridge center, or whatever you want to call it. All right, let's get back out there and take a look at some more stuff in orbit. And we'll begin here with Hadfield and Joseph, who now need to make their way up to join Jebediah in orbit. So I need to wait until that station slash ship is making its way across the top over there of mission control, because that way if we can launch from directly under the orbit of that ship, we can reduce the cost of that inclination change by basically not even paying it. So here they go, Hadfield, Joseph, launching in a Hydra 2 capsule. They will take that Centaur with them all the way up to the station because there's room in the station for any leftover fuel, and I'm just going to empty this thing as much as I can into the station, then decouple the Centaur finally. Now that will put a slightly higher drain on our monopropellant, but there is some monopropellant in the Centaur as well. So as long as we don't use up all of it and then some from the Hydra, we'll actually be making out okay. We'll be net positive on the requirements here for the fuel. And there goes my favorite part again, the deployment of payloads, the interaction of all of the deployable bits and pieces, the solar panels, the radio dishes, the antenna. Although as I was saying earlier, this is only one of the launches that's going to go up to the station before it heads over to Minmus to search for the cure to Hadfield's disease. We need a name for that disease actually, now come to think of it. I'll think about that for a little bit. Anyway, we need to bring up a little lander, and while we manipulate our orbit here to try and match ourselves up with the station, I'm going to talk about a couple things. One is the lander that we need to attach here, as well as some of the mistakes that were made along the way in trying to get this new ship. If we want to go back to the launch of the station and take a look at this, you can see that the very first simulator test, remember it was a simulator then, was very wobbly. Jeb didn't like that at all. We had to fix that with a strut up in the top. The strut right here is what fixed that particular shaking problem. Indeed, in that simulator, we shook so much that theoretically, Jebediah would have been killed by the G-forces from the shaking. But since it's a sim, we're going to continue with things like decoupling to see how it goes, just to see if everything decouples okay. And that was me testing to see whether or not decoupling the engine section, in case of some critical failure there, would be a problem. In the second simulator launch, you can see with those struts in there, everything was much better. But there was still a little bit of wiggle now down at the base. That required a different kind of strut. I forgot to mention this one when I was deconstructing it, but if we back up here, you remember that tapered section right there. It was very loose right at that joint. I increased the mass of this delta part right here, but that didn't help enough. It got a little bit better, so I fixed it up completely by adding this strut that goes in between this decoupler, and if you look inside right there, you can see it right there. There's the little tip of it. Maybe if I scroll around in here, you can see it. There's a good view of it. Right there, you can see that it goes in between, so that segment right there and that segment, they are welded together with that extra structural integrity part. So it was wobbling, but at least it flew, although I still wanted to fix that, so I did. But then I had this problem. That one was caused by the strut that was up in the fairing. Coming back to this fairing one last time, there's another aspect to this. So that strut right there, when I originally put it in, I did not have it attached to this new little miniature decoupler, and that caused the sides here, when they would decouple, that strut was holding it in too tight, and these pieces wouldn't actually knock away and come out. Instead, what you just saw happened, where it barely decoupled and then it went down the side of the rocket, hitting lights and other things, and hitting itself and exploding along the way. By putting it on that little miniature decoupler right in there, right there, that when I fire off the sides here and open the fairing, I have in my action group there as well the little decouplers. You can see them lighting up green right there. So all that goes at the same time, and that fixed that problem of the decoupler fairing walls not coming away nicely. So those were the problems and those were the fixes. Now, I said I wanted to talk about that lander a little bit. So the idea here is that Jeb is already up there, and now we have Joseph and Hadfield making their way up, and they're going to dock on to one of the two shielded nodes up there. Then a lander will come up on an automated launch, and it will dock to the other one. So you can see we're opening it up right here. There goes the first shielded one. I picked that one not for any particular reason. It was just because that was the closest one to the top of the Hydra as it was coming in. When we bring the lander up, it'll be smaller, it'll be far more maneuverable, and so I could put it on the other side. This one was just simpler to take the closest one, so that's what we did. But when we bring that lander up, we will go to the other side where there's another shielded docking port, and we will attach it on that side. And because I'm going to try to make it have about the same amount of mass as a Hydra capsule and service module, theoretically, and I haven't tried this out yet, but theoretically it's going to be balanced for when we fire up the engines and we need to head over to Minmus. It won't be shaking all over the place. It might bend and flex a little bit, but hopefully it'll hold. Now, we're opening up the communication dishes, the antenna, we're bringing out that boom on an infernal robotics hinge there, the larger communication dish. This will provide all kinds of comms in case we need to communicate back with Kerbin. On top of that, remember I said I wanted to transfer over that fuel, so here we go, using our TAC fuel balancer to bring all the extra Centaur fuel across into the actual station, as well as then decoupling that Centaur to go floating off. And in theory, what would happen is it would drop back to Kerbin over time because there would be still air resistance at this altitude had this been something real, like a real planet, like it would happen on Earth. In here, it's going to kind of float around a little bit, but like we said, we're concerned more with our fuel shortage right now, so Bill's just going to have to suck it up and deal with it because now we have a bit of orbital debris. Oh well, too bad, Bill. The next launch up here is the lander that is going to go down onto the surface of Minmus at its poles and collect that material that we need in order to save Hadfield. Right here, this, I have to say, is just in general one of my favorite views. The view where you're looking down at the surface and away it drops as you have that cool angle where the rocket is coming up into its gravity turn. That's one of my favorite parts, and I cannot get enough of that. I watch it every single time I launch. I just try to position that camera so that I can see that ground fall away and that gravity turn. And then we get into my first favorite, which is the separation of everything. But you know this, you've heard me talk about it before. When that fairing pops open and you get to see that payload and you know that you are right there on the cusp of being in orbit. And then there it goes. And everything starts to come out. Now, right now, I don't have a lot coming out because this is a lander and all of its stuff is really supposed to be used once we get to Minmus. So I'll get to fiddle with it then, where all the science instruments and the little drill and the solar panels and everything will come out. Right now, all we're trying to do is make our way over to the space. Oh, it's not a space station. I'm going to call it a ship. I keep wanting to call it a space station, but I think really the Minmus Explorer or the Minmus Traveller, whatever you want to call it. I've currently called it Minmus Traveller, actually, but that we're on our way over to there, and it's like a ship, I think. Now, how about that lander, huh? Look at that thing. Oh, so gorgeous. We'll take you down into the vehicle assembly building soon, and you'll get a chance to see that up close. And of course, you're going to see it when it's on Minmus doing its duty, but that's going to be in the next episode. In this one, we're just going to dock up with the station, and then we'll have a few things to take care of at the station as well. Now, the inclination is a bit off still on here, so I have begun my maneuver early with this very low thrust engine that's on this lander in order to rendezvous with that station. I'm trying to bring up that orbit to get ourselves out of being suborbital and to rendezvous at the same time without using too much fuel. We were on that incorrect inclination because the station itself, the ship, Minmus Traveller was on that inclined orbit in order to match Minmus. That way later when we actually go there, we won't have to spend the extra delta V that it takes to change inclination. Then we launched straight into the proper inclination. But the lander, when it lifted off, I was trying to match the orbit, but it's really hard. You remember back when I was doing Project Gateway, and sometimes you'd have to wait multiple loops going around the planet till mission control came right under the exact right spot of the orbit of the station you're going up to, while at the same time the station itself needs to be going overhead, and in order to get these two to match up, I might have needed to wait a couple more loops, but I didn't. I went a little early, and that is resulting in the slightly off inclination there. But it's okay. We've matched up with the rendezvous coordinates here of our ship. Minmus Traveller is easing its way into place as we ease our way up, lining ourselves with that docking node. I've got my Navyfish docking alignment indicator going, and so it allows me to get these really cool views. I love watching as that planet is going by underneath and we're slowly positioning ourselves and then easing into that spot. Once we're all docked up here, I have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. We're going to have to transfer some fuel around, make sure we have it all in the right tanks. We're going to have to go out on an EVA in order to do a little bit of construction to finish up things, get some stability in there so that we won't fall apart as we're on our way over to Minmus. Add a couple of RCS jets using Kerbal attachment system to the outside, and then we'll be all set. Before we take a look at that lander, let's take a look at new parts. We have the Hydra capsule, so I figured I would call our new lander capsule the Hydra Lander. You can see it has quite a few modules in here. It's got its basic life support systems, electricity, and all of that. It has a Kerbal attachment system container built in, MechJeb, a tiny reaction wheel. Really, I'm simulating that all that thing is doing is it's allowing it to have some sort of like a gyroscopic navigation. It's not really going to be able to do very much with just a 0.1. And let's see, we have other new parts in here. We have this new engine, the Phoenix 65L. It's got a little bit of gimbaling so that I can use it for landers and allow them to maneuver just a tiny bit using that. You can see that the engine is a vacuum engine. It has absolutely nothing for sea level there, so you're not going to really get much. This is a 65 thrust, which puts it a little bit above the 30 over here, but below the 100 that I have down there. So I just needed sort of a mid-range lander thing. Let's see here. So that part we saw last time. We have this new fuel tank. It's pretty small, only 72 liquid fuel, but it's a welded piece, so it looks kind of cool because it's got the gold on the top and the bottom. Over here we have a new service module. The service module contains a little bit of food and a decent amount of monopropellant, some oxidizer and liquid fuel, as well as a little bit of water. So food, water, and I'm expecting that the oxygen will come from an external oxygen tank, so it doesn't actually have oxygen on board. Over here we have a new RCS quad. It's a 0.6 thrust quad, and the intention there is to use it on the side of any lander that I'm going to make. I also gave it the Kerbal attachment system grab module, which allows it to be stored inside containers and grabbed and moved around and reattached. It has a size of 10, which means your basic box can fit 4 of these before the box is full. I have also gone back and added the grab module through the use of that program that I keep up to date and how it installs my applications, my mods and everything. So it can now add the grab module to any part that I want, and I've done the same thing with this battery. This battery here is double the size, and it takes up double the size inside the actual containers as well. Over here we have a new shielded docking port. It is similar to this other shielded docking port. It's the same basic idea, but we used that one on the space station, and this one would get used on the top of any lander. I have also added a very large food container here. 600 food is enough to keep the Kerbals happy for a very long time. There's technically in that food container thing a lot more space than for 600 food. However, what I'm assuming is that this center section here is a fairly sizable passageway that allows Kerbals to travel in between. It's like a little tunnel, and that the food is only stored in the outside here. And so I reduced it down from the very large maximum capacity of probably around 900. I made it 600 instead. Another new part right here, we have this medium landing leg. So I have this small one over here, and now we have this medium-sized one here. I also have the mobility enhancer, telescopic ladders. I like how they're called mobility enhancers. And this leads us into looking at the actual lander itself. You can see that I had extended the fuel tank here. I put a normal Chimera for the lower stage, well, the lower half of the stage here with the boosters, but I needed some extra fuel because I didn't want to use an extra stage. We're just going to go up on this one engine, so I put in one of my new fuel tanks to extend that out and provide enough fuel to get us up there. We have this Copernicus mod sort of adapter, we'll call it here. This adapter allowed me to put a 3.75 fairing on the top. Now we can move in here and take a look at the actual lander. So in there, you see we'll pull this away. Boop, boop. Okay, gone. You can see how I used those fuel tanks. So we have those legs over there that can extend down when it's time to land. And then let's see, what do we have here? We have some science instruments on the outside of it, all around here. A Kerbal attachment system box on the back. Down on the bottom, we have a variety of things. We have our oxygen tank right there, wastewater, carbon dioxide. I'm feeding these fuel tanks up into the main service module, and then presumably there's a pipe running down into the engine. This engine is attachable or surface mountable, let's say. So I have some little RCS jets on the bottom there to provide extra stability and maneuverability. There's that engine. This is our water processor here. It'll split water and allow us to make additional oxygen in there. We can take that away and take those away. Backing ourselves up, you can see there's not much else going on these legs, so I'm going to pull those off. I had those attached with this little strut. There was an extra monopropellant tank right there. We can get rid of that science. This is a drill. You're going to see that later. Couple solar panels on the side there in case I need those. We have our little attachment there for pipes and some batteries. Those RCS that I had just recently added. More lights. We have on the side here a deployable antenna and another antenna over here. And this one is used for liftoff. We don't really use it after that, but it allows us to lift off with nobody on board and get it high enough that then the regular antenna right there can take over. Then we have our docking port and our automation right here, although I am kind of pretending that this ring is around the outside edge and that this is actually a tunnel. The artwork doesn't show it, but presumably that is a little tunnel that will allow them to go through the docking port and down into this new cabin right here. This is the Alcor cabin, although I have a lot of things turned off on it right now. For example, you can see those little cameras right there, but I don't have the cameras turned on just yet. We have our ladder and the service module, and that is about it. Okay, we're done with this one.
I don't think there's another piece of information we could squeeze into the memory banks. Next time we'll design a bigger one. That all sounds great. I'll let you get back to it. Now send in Kessler next, if you please. Sir? For his report. You want him down early? What do you mean, down early? Sir, he's on the Odyssey station. No, he's in the science lab. Oh, no. Is this one of those anomaly effects again? Most likely. We could call up to the station and see if Valentina is reading anything. Bob, Valentina is in the assembly building. Okay, this is getting all too confusing. Computer, locate all personnel.
Kranz and Bob are located in Kranz's Office of Mission Control. Jebediah, Joseph, and Hadfield are located on the Minmus Traveller. Bill, Kessler, and Neil are located on Odyssey Station. Valentina is located in the Research Bay.
That's not at all how I remember it. Computer, have any anomalies affected the locations of any base personnel in the last 7 days?
Negative.
Very well, have Valentina report for her daily briefing then. You got it, sir.
As you know, before Kessler went up to the Odyssey, he assigned me to testing his PDS, the particle displacement system. Anyway, it's looking promising. If this works, like he says it will, we'll be able to open a 1 centimeter hole between mission control and the stable mud anomaly we detected. It's not big enough to send much through, but liquids and gases should have no problem. We'll be able to drill Cathay, refine it to make it take up less volume, and then ship it back to Kerbin directly to a receiver in the storage warehouse, and directly into our tanks. It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems. We won't need to send fuel tanks. Well, we will need to send a couple initially, because this is not going to be finished before we run out. But after that, we won't need to send any more.
Okay, Kerbinauts, you know what time it is. It's time to bring this one to a close. Next episode, Jebediah is going to have to go out there and do a little sort of like repair work, but a little bit more like assembly, base assembly up in orbit, doing some EVA, Kerbal Attachment System stuff. So until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.
He assigned me to testing his PDS, the particle displacement system. The particle displacement system. The particle displacement system. It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems.
Shortage.
Okay.
One more time.
It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems.
Okay. Say it a little smoother though.
Okay. It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems.
Try it like this. It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems.
Okay. It'll solve all our fuel It's hard. I can't do because of my one missing tooth.
That's okay. Try again.
It'll solve all our fuel Okay. It'll solve all our It'll solve all our fuel shortage problems.